All right, good morning, everybody. The purpose of this video is to take a look at topic 7.7, and this is the innovations in communication and technology for the 1920s. But I'll tell you right off the bat, I'm going to cheat a little bit, and we're also going to tie up a couple loose ends on the on 7.8, cultural and political controversies, because I think there's a little bit of overlap that comes between these two topics because 1920s. So let's take a look. So during class, we talked about controversies around race and immigration as it was related to the 1920s. We talked about how the Great Migration led to racial tensions in some northern and some western cities. And we talked about Marcus Garvey and the UNIA and Carter Woodson and the development of Black History Month as a form of cultural attention on the African American community and kind of defining the African American community. Well, like on the artistic and literary side of things, there are new forms of art and literature that are going to be expressing like these different identities. And so there's a level of cultural diversity that comes out during the 1920s. Not that it wasn't there before, but it is really kind of being recognized for the first time as being like present in all parts of the society. And so this is kind of like there's a little bit of regionalism versus national identity that comes into this, but there's definitely like an artistic cultural end of it. And we could talk about painting and we could talk about sculpture and all that kind of fine art stuff, but this is the jazz age. Jazz music is kind of like a purely uniquely American development. It doesn't have much direct connection to European musical forms. It's definitely not classical music. It's actually a blend of musical styles that you kind of see in the African American South, blending of some European styles and some African styles of music that come into play. But it's really kind of truly an African American, specifically African American kind of musical style. And this is actually, we will probably listen to a little bit of this during class time. I'm kind of name dropping in here a little bit of some of the big names of the 1920s and for decades beyond. Duke Ellington is one of the big band leaders, and Louis Armstrong is going to have Bessie Smith as well, decades-long musical careers as they are going to kind of transcend the 1920s and kind of be emblematic of the 1920s as things come into being, even though their great success is going to come in the years and the decades to come, like after the 20s, but it is really kind of, quintessential, kind of a prototypical thought for the 1920s is that it's the jazz age. Similarly, in terms of literature, this is the age of the Harlem Renaissance, where the Great Migration leads to this realization of a common African American culture, and the Harlem Renaissance kind of centered in the borough or the Harlem neighborhood in New York City. This awareness of what goes of the African American community in that culture is being written about by poets and authors like Langston Hughes and Countee Cullen and Claude McKay and Zora Neale Hurston. And embedded into this are, when you get into the 1920s and the 30s, there's research being done, interviews being conducted with former enslaved Americans that are still alive, that lived through the days of slavery, before and during the Civil War, to try to get a recounting of that. And so the Harlem Renaissance is just kind of, I've heard it said before that it's not like they looked around and said, hey, we're having a Renaissance right now. But there is, in hindsight, there's a recognition that the 1920s really represents this awakening of this part of American culture, an ethnic American culture, an African American culture, which is both on the basis of race and like regionally too. New Orleans jazz versus Chicago and Kansas City blues music. It's kind of, identified by the region of the country as well. So just as the jazz age is quintessential, almost like the image that people get for the 1920s, Prohibition is the same. So in 1919, the U.S. ratifies the 18th Amendment. The 18th Amendment isn't technically what created Prohibition, that national ban on alcohol, but it gave Congress the power to regulate the sale and distribution of alcohol, and that is what Congress does in 1919 with the Volstead Act. There's a little bit of an anti-German sentiment that comes into this in the aftermath of World War One because German beer manufacturing that is going on. But this is absolutely connected into the American Temperance Society from the antebellum days and the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Anti-Saloon League. So this is the culmination of all that. And when this is enacted going into the 1920s, there is a whole division of federal law enforcement whose job it is to confiscate and destroy liquor production, whether it is like on a large scale, and large scale legitimate production kind of shuts down and they convert to producing other products. But on a small scale, it's like illegal liquor manufacturing. They're going through and they're destroying, they're destroying the product. So in this bottom picture, you can see they're just like literally pouring this barrel full of, I'm not sure if that's like hard liquor or if that is beer, but they're just pouring it into the sewer system. And here these guys have confiscated this still, making like hard liquor, probably making gin because that is a big drink for the 1920s. But all the bottles that are here that are full of this stuff, that's all going to get like just demolished as they're going through. This is a big expansion of the federal government. It's because it's a new branch of federal law enforcement. And while it initially kind of exists as part of the Treasury Department, because this is actually like economic regulation, it's going to kind of stay in place and it's going to evolve into the FBI, which didn't really exist before the 1920s. It kind of grows up out of an offshoot of the Palmer raids in 1919 and then into the Prohibition enforcement end of this through the rest of the 20s. But of course, it's not like all Americans just gave up their drink without any kind of like resistance to this. And so bootlegging and speakeasies are a couple of terms to keep track of because this is sort of emblematic of the illegal liquor acquisition, I guess is the right way to say it. Bootlegging is an old term that goes back to the days in the 18th century colonial era, that if you were going to sneak liquor into a place that you weren't supposed to, which is what bootlegging means. Bootlegging is literally called bootlegging because they would hide liquor in their bootleg. If they're wearing boots, they would just kind of slip it down into their bootleg and kind of carry it like by their ankle. So that's where that term comes from. Speakeasies are illegal bars during the Prohibition era, and they were called speakeasies because if you were going to gain access to these secretive places, you're only going to get there if you just speak in an easy tone of voice, is how they said it. And so the term speakeasy just kind of derives out of that. NASCAR and stock car racing across the South, that grows out of the development of bootlegging and selling illegal liquor, because these guys that were rum running is the other term for this. They needed kind of souped up cars that could outrun the police when they're there chasing after them. So that's kind of a normal thing for the 20s as well. Hey, talking about cars, we'll go back there in a few minutes. But this is just kind of like nobody really is. It's not true to say nobody is paying attention to this, but I would think the majority of Americans are just kind of like, the law is all well and good, but if I need a private drink in my private home, that's okay. It just, the irony of ironies is like one of the congressmen that helps write the Volstead Act is in turn arrested for violating the Volstead Act because he had an illegal amount of liquor in his possession and was brought up on charges. That type of illegal activity is what grows into organized crime. You've taken a multi-million-dollar business and made it illegal overnight, and so with that money to be made, it's going to keep going. It's just going to happen in a very illegal, organized illegality kind of sense. And so this is like gangsters like Al Capone, who's kind of the poster child for this. Italian immigrant, in the city of Chicago, in charge of the bootlegging industry there, but he's also involved in bribery and corruption and human trafficking and drugs, and this is just illegal gambling is taking place. And so all of this illegal activity is just kind of another way that the 20s are sort of emblematic, that it's a decade of contradictions where there is a growth of race relations going on cultural diversity. At the same time, there's a growth in the Ku Klux Klan. There is a growth of prohibition as good, wholesome traditional values, at the same time that you see a growth of organized crime, which is anything but good, wholesome traditional values. So these icons of the 1920s sometimes are kind of, well, in controversy with each other. It's kind of why it's in there in this title. The Prohibition era does come to an end, of course, with the 21st Amendment ratified in 1933. This is during the Depression, and it's not like Americans needed to drink their sorrows away during the Depression, but this is a part of the economy that could maybe, if you make it legal again, it can spur some economic growth. And it did a little bit in the mid 1930s, but and it's kind of like a longer after effect to the Depression. Easy way to remember these amendments that kind of establish and then eliminate the Prohibition era. 21st Amendment. So at 21 you can drink, but at 18 you can't. So 18th Amendment takes the drink away. 21st Amendment puts it back in place. You're welcome for that. And then still on the idea of traditional versus the modern viewpoint of things, gender roles are still, I mean, you're kind of going through an evolution during this period of history. Women at home are, this is the traditional viewpoint, right? That once you are married, you are, kind of destined to be the leader of the family within the household, not the leader of the family in the public eye. But the reality is, thanks to World War One and the growth of the economy in general, there are more and more women at work. And so the ladies here are working as like, it looks like they're working on I can't tell what they're working on, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. It looks like they're kind of like maybe spooling some wire or thread. I think this is maybe like in a radio factory where they're actually coiling some copper wire through that. I should check my sourcing on that. I apologize for not having a good source, description on this picture for us. But women in the workforce, still, when women get married, the general expectation was they were going to return to the home, but that's not holding up as much during the 1920s. For young women, single women, they're going to work and they are going to sort of develop into the modern American woman, and that is the term of the flapper. They're called flappers because one of these styles of the shoes they were wearing had these big straps that would make flapping noises when they would walk or dance. So they say. But flappers are the modern American woman, where they are wearing shorter skirts and wearing shorter hair, and they are going to work, and they are drinking and smoking and going to jazz clubs and hanging out with the guys. The lady over here in this side, she's got like a little flask on her garter belt under her skirt because, it's the 1920s, and this is just kind of like a level of equality that's there. There is a growing sense of equality in the women's movement. They have just achieved equality in voting rights, and they are also achieving a little bit more autonomy, a little bit more independence in the professional world, and so they want to exercise that freedom in the social world and like their personal lives, and so this kind of goes on here. But whether it is the fact that they're going out on dates unchaperoned with young men, or if it is because of drinking and smoking in jazz clubs, there are concerns about the decay of morals in American society. And you can kind of see that here and in organized crime and in other challenges of that traditional 19th century viewpoint. It's only a generation ago where we were still talking about being the 19th century, and all of this would have seemed so foreign and alien. There's just a lot of change that happens very quickly with this. So one of the reasons that change happened so quickly has got to do with the new technology and the new manufacturing techniques that are coming in. Production and factory production is just getting so much more efficient. Taylorism and scientific management and mass production in the factories, it is becoming a fine-tuned art. not necessarily even on the big items that you might need to buy, but just on like any number of consumer goods, household appliances, electric blender, electric toaster, electric refrigerator, electric stovetop, electric washing machine. A lot of focus on the household with these new products because they're targeting those women at home that they are going to be the consumers of this. And so this is all about trying to, identify people that want to improve their standard of living through, well, buying things. And this is going to lead to a greater sense of consumerism that goes into the 1920s through to the 2020s, right? But there's also going to be better communications, that you're going to see print ads, but also you're going to hear radio ads, and you're going to see some advertisement that's kind of like associated into movies even. And if you can't afford some of these big, look, if you want to buy a refrigerator and a washing machine and a car all at the same time, well, then you might not be able to afford to buy it with cash, but it's okay. These stores will give you credit. Not like credit cards that you could use anywhere, but you can get a line of credit from the Ford Motor Company or from General Electric or from Sears if you're going to buy some, high dollar ticket items from them, and you just buy now, pay later. Because what's a little bit of personal debt as this all comes into play? Don't forget, the Great Depression is coming up in 7B for us. So all of this buying and credit seems great, and you really do want this stuff because they're going to convince you why you want this stuff. So whether it is like the big ticket items or just, a can of tomato soup, which tastes pretty good. If you're not into the Campbell's thing, I get it. But clearly, if you're going to have a Merry Christmas dinner, you need a can of tomato soup to go along with it. If you want to take care of your hygiene after you have that can of tomato soup, be sure to protect your teeth from grit and get some Colgate toothpaste. And make sure you are practicing good daily hygiene. On the hygiene end of this marketing, whether it is toothpaste or makeup or razors, all of this is like a new push through advertisements to convince people that you need to buy this. You want to be popular in your social life? Well, then put on some makeup. Shave your face if you're a guy. Like, or better yet, prevent kill the bacteria that causes bad breath. Listerine is developed in the 1920s as a way to kill bad breath, but it's all a marketing ploy because they know they want you. They can kind of catch you, make you want to buy make them want to buy your stuff if they can just convince you that it's healthy for you. So whether it's toothpaste or Listerine or, oh my goodness, cigarettes, because there was a whole wave of advertising in the 20s where they are going to convince you that cigarettes are actually going to be healthy for you. So the advertisement here is literally trying to promote the idea that if you smoke Chesterfield cigarettes, you're going to be a better tennis player, and it's going to give you that same kind of sense of exhilaration, which is completely ridiculous, but that's maybe yet another controversy that we'll see in the 1920s. Without a doubt, the industry that is going to see the biggest change that comes into this is going to be the automobile industry, and the guy behind it all is Henry Ford. Henry Ford does not invent the car. The automobile has been around since the 1890s before Ford really gets involved with it. But what Ford does is he invents the affordable car because he is going to put assembly line production into place. So assembly lines, it's kind of like the standard of production in the 21st century in these types of setups, where workers really just stand in one place, and then you have a conveyor belt that brings the piece to you, and you are going to do your one task over and over and over again, and it's going to be just a much more efficient way to kind of run this production setup. So let's look at some numbers on this. When Ford Motor Company opens in 1908, they had almost no production. So the numbers here on the right side, this is the production number. The green line on here, this is the production. So with almost no production, it cost about $950 to buy a car that's being produced on a very small scale. In 2022 dollars, that's about $32,000 for a new car, which sounds like a really nice new car. But then what you see is because of assembly line production, production goes up, and as production goes up, costs come down. And then right here in the middle, there's like this little blip where like production drops and the cost of the car goes up. But look, this is 1916, 17, 18, 19. This is World War One. So if you follow this and you just kind of account for this as the war and you come back over here, look at what happens next. The price of these things are still coming down and production comes up with them producing like over 2 million cars every year. And the cost at this point is like $295. So in today's dollars, it's like the car back in 1908 was going to cost you like 31,000. The car here in 1924 is going to cost you about 5,000 for a brand new car. It's a pretty no frills car, but it was one of the only cars that's being mass produced like this, and so it is hugely popular. The Model T Ford gets in the conversation about inventions that changed the century, not just because of the car industry, but because it is going to create greater personal mobility. It gives you the chance to go places. You can drive farther to and from work. You can drive to go on vacation. If you're going on vacation, well, then you're going to need places to go eat, and you're going to need places to stay. Friends or family, sure, but you want to go stay at a hotel or a motel? Be aware the difference between a hotel and a motel is that motels come with parking, and this is a new business model in the 1920s, is a motor hotel where you can drive up in your car, park your car, get a room for the night, and then move on the next day. This is kind of how the modern world works, and so the car industry is going to create several multi-million dollar industries around the country. That's just going to bring us, I mean, one step closer into the modern world that we live in. And then to make sure that we're all going to like enjoy the benefits of this as quickly as possible, we're going to hear about it on the radio. KDKA makes their, as they are known in Pittsburgh as the original pioneer broadcasting station of the world. In 1920, their news and live events they were covering, they were like reading on the radio the election results for Warren G. Harding's presidential election. This is the first radio station in America, first commercial radio station in the world. Over the course of the decade, they are going to expand into nationwide networks like NBC, the National Broadcasting Company, ABC, CBS. They're all kind of like these television networks, all have their starts as radio networks in the 1920s and 30s. Advertising to convince you to buy this stuff, so make sure you make it a radio Christmas because this is the cool Christmas gift you need this year. And it's going to be like the type of programming that they run. There's a little bit of novelty that comes to it, but comedy shows, drama shows, it's like these, they're going to take like great novels and they're going to reenact them as little radio plays. Soap operas, the daytime kind of cheesy drama stuff, they start that in the radio, and the reason that they're called soap operas is that the big advertisers for them were soap companies. So these soap operas, I mean, some of the soap operas that start on radio in the 1920s and 30s, they're going to stay on television for decades. Like The Guiding Light went off the air a few years ago. It was in production for the better part of 70 years. And then these dudes over here on the left, this is one of my favorite pictures ever. The circus is in town, and so the folks at WJZ Radio, they are conducting this interview with an elephant, which is one of the dumbest things I have ever heard, but it is also a really fun novelty because, well, most Americans never heard an elephant before. And so the idea this is a cultural awakening at some level, well, that's definitely worth keeping track of. As big or maybe bigger than radio, the radio industry is the movie industry. Technically, it was referred to as the cinema business, but people just call them movies like they were moving pictures. The technology on this goes back to Thomas Edison in the 1890s, but by the time you're the 1920s, movies like The Big Parade, they are bringing in like millions of dollars in box office receipts. So The Big Parade is the highest grossing movie of the 1920s. It kind of brings in about $10 million of 1920s dollars. That's a few hundred million in today's. It's definitely a bona fide box office success. The biggest movie star at the time is Charlie Chaplin. He is known the world over because, for the most part, in these silent movies, it kind of transcends like language barriers because funny is funny. I kind of have a sense that at some point later in the year, we may circle back and watch a little Charlie Chaplin in class because I think it's always a good thing to watch some Charlie Chaplin movies. The thing that radio and movies are going to do, it's going to help create a national culture, a culture of like entertainment, which is when I think about when I have conversations with strangers today, like if I'm just trying to make chit chat, it's easy to talk about TV shows or radio shows or music or movies or sports, because sports heroes like Babe Ruth, greatest baseball player in the major leagues through the 1920s and 30s and maybe the greatest baseball player ever, he is a household name because of the popularity he has on radio. And, well, this is actually a movie poster because they made a movie about him, starring him. It's not a very good movie, but it is pretty popular as everything comes together through the 20s. There are more movies made in the 1920s than there are in any other decade in movie history. Of the majority of these movies have actually been lost because so many have been destroyed through fires in movie studio warehouses. It is every now and then it'll make the news when they uncover an old print of a of a movie that's not been seen in 75 or 80 years. Promoting heroes like Charlie Chaplin and King Vidor for the big parade, and Charles Lindbergh, whose claim to fame is the fact that he flew a solo flight. He flew across the Atlantic Ocean by himself and took him 32 hours to do so. And this might seem like a little bit of an odd accomplishment to make him a celebrity, but it makes him a celebrity on a global scale because it's a great feat. It's going to help create the aviation industry in the 1920s and beyond, and it's going to kind of put him in the limelight of American celebrity until, well, for the rest of his life through the 1930s and 40s, and I think into the early 1950s even. All of this is part of that national culture. So there is a common culture that's spreading all through the United States. And at the same time as this, it is also creating a greater awareness of the regional cultures. This national promotion of a common culture is also pointing out New Orleans jazz and Kansas City blues, and different types of regional identities start to show up because you get a better sense of what life could be like for other people in other parts of the country. And so in a very low key, long term sort of way, it's creating a little bit more of a diverse culture for the United States that we're going to definitely pick back up some in the 1930s and 40s, but especially in the 1950s once we get past the Great Depression and World War II. A lot of things going on in the 1920s. It is important to try to keep track of the big picture on this. So thanks for hanging out through all of this and listening to me. I appreciate it.